Isn't it a precious privilege to meet together and worship the Lord? Welcome our guests and those that are with us online. One that had planned to be here, I know exactly where he would be sitting, Jack Kemp. He would have been right back there in front of the AV table. He was with us last Lord's Day in the great room, but instead of coming here, he moved on up. And we rejoice in the victory that God gives through Jesus Christ, that because the Lord is our shepherd, even through the valley of the shadow of death, we need not fear. We sang this morning about his rod. We know that his staff also comforts us and directs us, and that his watchful eye protects us. Perhaps if we could live on a sheep ranch for a year, we could better identify with the words which David wrote as to the behavior and character and nature and even stubbornness, yes, of sheep. In our urban, city-type life, for many of us, we're simply not aware of what is involved in purchasing and caring for and feeding and leading and securing sheep. Some years ago, Philip Keller wrote a book entitled A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm. Perhaps you'd like to read it. During the Depression, with his sweat and tears, he worked collecting enough money that he could buy 30 ewes. He invested his life in them, and for 8 years in East Africa, he raised these animals. And because of that, when he opened this passage, he could see, he could relate, he could understand some things that he never would have otherwise. When we first meet David, he's the shepherd boy, and in 1 Samuel 17, he's the youngest of Jesse's sons. He's out doing what was considered menial and trivial, the lowest of all the jobs in their home. And yet God was training him and preparing him and equipping him to be the shepherd king. And so when he fought off the lion or the bear, he was ready then to go against Goliath with his sling and those 5 stones. How often do you wonder David must have watched these animals and thought about, you know, what I am to them, Yahweh, the God of heaven, is to me. I've been leading them beside still waters. I've been providing green pastures. I've restored them when they've fallen over. I've made sure they were not in want, but they could enjoy peace and security. And that's what the Lord has done for me. How often God had rescued David from King Saul or from his own son Absalom, who rebelled against him, or all the attacks of the Philistines and other foes on all sides. And now David could say, and you could feel the joy and the gratitude and perhaps pride, the Lord is my shepherd. It's as if to say, look who I have, that owns me, that watches me, that steers me, that uses me. Look who I have. He couldn't keep it within. The view we have of the Lord determines everything else. If we see him in some limited, provincial, merely human way, as weak in any sense at all or incapable, because of that, we will be less likely to trust him and listen to him and walk with him and heed his every voice of authority. But if we see him as omnipotent, all-powerful, as the one who made the stars and the earth and the sea and sustains it all, invincible, unbeatable, unstoppable. There is no wolf. There is no cougar. There's no coyote. There's nothing out there, if we stay with this shepherd, that can destroy us. And so when we say the Lord is my shepherd, the implication is, I am his sheep. No mere words, but rather a genuine, exclusive devotion that encompasses all of life without any competition from myself or any other person or thing. It means that I will go with him wherever, whenever, and however he leads. There's a hymn we often sing. I'm a sheep, and the Lord is my shepherd, watching over my soul to keep guarding over me ever, watching wherever I go. And when the winds blow, he is my shelter. And when I'm lost and alone, he rescues me. And when the lion comes, he is my victory. Constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me. And so to see myself and for you to see yourself as a sheep in his care, in this special flock, this local congregation with godly shepherds seeking to imitate his care for all of us. And I'd like to say a word of thanks to our elders. If you're not aware, I want you to be aware of the countless hours they spend thinking and praying and discussing and wrestling with all that we have gone through. I almost said when we began this morning, this is one of the first services I've been in that's been taped. Behind the scenes, setting everything up, making it as comfortable and, quote, normal as it possibly can be. If you've not thanked our elders, you want to make a point to do that today and this week. In 1 Peter 5, we studied in our Bible class recently, Peter, as a fellow elder, writing to those who shared in that role, and he said, when the chief shepherd appeared, that's Psalm 23. That's the good shepherd of John 10, where Jesus said, my sheep know me, and I know them. I call them by name. Watch out for someone that might sneak in another way. That's a thief and a robber. And Jesus said, the hired hand flees when the wolf attacks, but the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Daniel Lang was telling me they played a game in their house just recently, where he was the shepherd and the little girls were the sheep, and he hid himself. And they were to cover their eyes, whether they really did or not, we're not sure. But merely by listening to his voice, they were to seek him out and find him. That's the way a devoted sheep is. And as long as I know that the shepherd is nearby, sure, valleys and hardship and affliction and suffering and illness and aging and even death and bereavement. But my confidence is in him, not in myself. And all I have to do is to stay with him. And therefore I need not worry, because he knows the way, the paths of righteousness. He can take me from the stale, brown, dying, parched land to grass that's green and lush and an area that's fertile with water that's not raging and not pushing and difficult to drink, but it's still. And there's a serenity, there's a peace, there's a tranquility about resting in his presence. And learning that we don't always have to be busy, on the go, productive, have to get much more things done in order to make something happen. But there's a time to walk behind him, to nurture and encourage and embrace each other, and then there's a time to rest where it's quiet and still. He's my shepherd and I'm his sheep, first of all because he created me. I would not exist, nor would you, except for the grace and power and love and mercy of this amazing designer, this Lord of heaven and earth. And when I look at everything He made, and then I think He made me, He knows me, my name, the hairs of my head, my concerns and my fears, my doubts and challenges, it's overwhelming. Why wouldn't I follow Him? And second, because He bought me. I mentioned a moment ago Philip Keller putting everything he had to invest in these 30 ewes, and then he knew that that was only the beginning. And they would need constant care and watchfulness and provision. We've commemorated with the bread and the cup Jesus going to the cross and the offering of Himself in our place. And we've drunk the cup, thinking about the blood and all those lambs that went before, and how Jesus then and now continues, the book of Hebrews says, to intercede for us, to minister to us, to be our priest whose term never ends, to save to the uttermost or completely, to sanctify and perfect those who belong to Him. And the last two verses in Hebrews, if you turn to chapter 13, 20 and 21, we mentioned these last evening in our senior Sunday, speaks of the great shepherd of the sheep that was brought up from the dead. He created me. He bought me. He continues to care for me. And yet, for some in the world, there's a rejection of Christ because they see Him as restrictive, as wanting to keep us from crossing the fence. I meant to say, too, if you and I are both His sheep, you know what that makes us. We're pen pals. And some people say, I don't want that. I want to go out and eat what I want, find my own water, do my own thing. And Satan just gobbles up people that seek security or rest or peace in someone or something other than Yahweh. And then, of course, Jesus the Christ, God in the flesh. The key to everything is this opening statement. Let's shout it to the world. Let's be like David. It expresses humility, subjection, putting ourselves under the care of one who is greater than we. And here the King of Israel acknowledges He has one who is in charge of his soul and his care and his protection, who's doing for David what David has done for these animals. Philip Keller said, this relationship we have as sheep to shepherd links a lump of common clay to divine destiny. It means a mere mortal becomes the object of divine diligence. Keller saw in East Africa a contrast between two kinds of shepherds. There were those gentle and compassionate, thoughtful, who anticipated possible dangers and needs of the flock. They would rise up early in case a predator were to come. They would make sure the animals had made it through the night, if any were bandaged or struggling with parasites or ticks or some kind of infestation. And he would provide for every need the sheep had because he knew they couldn't find it on their own. Then Keller saw others who thought, hey, these animals know what to do. They don't really need my presence, not every day. No, not this early morning stuff, not this late night. No, not give up sleep for them. No, not expend a lot on their medical care. No, they'll be okay. Some will die, but so what? The shepherd was the key to the health, the livelihood, the happiness, and the longevity of those in his care. When I was a boy and I used to hear these words, the Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. I thought, why would someone not want him? Like, I wouldn't want him. But it's, I shall not be in want. One paraphrase says, I have everything I need, or he is all that I want. David went through times of adversity and stress and hardship, peril. How could he say, I shall not be in want? He was on the run. He went without his daily comforts. He was attacked by his rivals. But David learned that the shepherd was always there. He will write in a moment, in the valley of the shadow of death, even there. Well, you know, if you follow Jesus, does that mean there's no valleys? It never gets burdensome. You never are weary. Everything is always up and it's smooth and there's health and wealth and prosperity. Absolutely not. That's not the point. The point is, as we read in Hebrews 13, 5 and 6, the Lord has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you, so that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper. Of whom shall I be afraid? What can man do to me? There's a sufficiency of recognizing that if I need it, He provides it. If not, then I don't. One writer notes that I don't lack rest, verse 2, or life, verse 3. I'm not in want of guidance, or safety, or provision. And the end of the psalm, surely goodness and mercy or loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's contentment. That's a sense that where I am, relying on God, serving God, obeying God, it's okay. Virus, I wish we didn't have it. Loss of income and job, tragic. Bereavement, as we've experienced, and I have recently in my own extended family. My cousin in Paris, Texas, passed away during the night. Jenny was the oldest of our group of siblings and first cousins. She and her sister grew up in Texas. Took me a little bit longer to get here. But she had a liver condition, and she declined so rapidly in the past few weeks and days, and got the message this morning about 3:15, she was gone. The Bible never pretends that those things don't happen, that we're somehow immunized or vaccinated against the woes of this life. But God is sufficient. And that's why Paul could write in Philippians 4, I've learned how to abound, and I've learned how to be abased, to have just about everything and to have almost nothing. I've learned the secret of being content, whatever state I'm in. You and I know that state is Texas, but not everybody sees that. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Philip Keller had a ewe, beautiful animal, strong, vibrant, healthy. The wool, everything about her was just right. And she brought lambs just like her, everything going for her. But this particular ewe was always looking for a hole in the fence. And she would go along the ground and she'd stick her nose, stick her nose, stick her nose. Here's green pasture, here's water, here's the shepherd, everything. And she's thinking, have you ever heard the grass is, that's sheep talk. The grass on the other side of the fence, right? And so Keller nicknamed this ewe Mrs. Gadabout. Next thing you knew, her offspring were following in her steps. And they started, he said she was a fence crawler. And the little ones imitating their mother. And then the other young lambs in the flock followed suit, peer pressure. And Keller saw this is the way some people can be. Hopping from one spot to another, resenting the barrier, thinking they're being cheated or deprived of something that's out there. And next thing you know, the younger ones are influenced and affected. Mrs. Gadabout was not allowed to stay in the flock because what she was costing was far too great. She had not learned contentment. I learned from Keller's book that pastures don't turn green automatically, and that the shepherd must rotate from one area to another, because the land has to recycle. And so looking ahead to what is better, what is healthier, what leads to maturity and growth, and yes, more offspring and more lambs to come. How does that happen? Well, the shepherd is always on the lookout. The idea of a sheep lying down indicates such a peace, such a freedom from fear and a sense of danger. Otherwise, they cannot have security or rest. He said that fear of predators will cause sheep to be agitated and anxious and nervous and edgy. If they think there's something out there, maybe it's a bear or a cougar or a coyote, and he said the sheep were so easily panicked that even a jackrabbit hopping up would cause them all to run. That's all they know to do. Even a little puppy dog that came to visit, they weren't aware of it, thought it was their end, and off they went. You and I need to be aware that Jesus Christ is greater. As we noted last time in 1 John 4, greater is He who is in you than he is in the world. And we need to be aware of our adversary, the devil, 1 Peter 5, prowling like a ravenous lion seeking to devour us. But our awareness of the lion should draw us closer to the shepherd and allow us to live confidently and victoriously and faithfully. A sheep can't lie down if there's friction in the flock, if there's rivalry, if individual animals are bumping each other, pushing each other, bullying each other. He said among chickens you call it the pecking order. With dogs, it's the top dog. He said with sheep, it's the butting order. And here will be some young animal and then some strong ewe, he said, will come and begin moving those feet and leaning toward the weaker one. Get the look in her eyes, and here's the message. Either you move over, get out of my way, listen to me, I'm going to dominate you and rule you, or I'm going to take you out. How could a sheep lie down if there's friction in the flock? That's why the Bible exhorts us to unity and peace and understanding and forgiveness and forbearance. That's why all the sheep belong to each other as well as the shepherd. And with the constant message we hear about racism, we've noted it several times and responded to it. In God's flock, the outward stuff doesn't matter. Amen. Among God's people, it's not some external, outward thing. There are predators out there. And so we help each other get closer. Sure, red and yellow, black and white. Sure, old and young. Sure, poor and not poor. Whatever the background may be. We can't have friction in the flock. It unsettles the sheep. And some sheep will then drift away because they can't understand why sheep that have this shepherd would treat each other rudely or condescendingly or with discrimination or prejudice or pride. Sheep can't lie down if they're bothered by ticks and parasites and pests. They're constantly then moving their legs, trying to shake it off, trying to get rid of these flies that would, he said, come into the nose. They'd be moving that head. And they need treatment, and they need medicine, and they need to have their wool cleaned of ticks because they can't do it themselves. Totally dependent, reliant upon the shepherd to get up early and stay up late and check every animal every day. Sheep can't lie down if they're hungry. And the shepherd knows that toil and skill and time are required to provide green pasture. And so he may need to fertilize, he may need to water, he may need to prepare the soil. He can't just say, I'm here watching the sheep. He's got to watch for their needs as well. And the key to all four of these, the fear of predators, the friction in the flock, the pests and ticks and parasites, and the hunger, the key to it all is the presence of the shepherd. And Keller noted that when his sheep were butting each other and fighting each other, when he showed up and called them by name, the competition was over. The master is here. We know his character. We know his care. We know that we need him. Oh, I've got these parasites bugging me. Hey, the shepherd is here. He's going to work through my coat. He's going to take those things out. He's going to treat me so I'm protected. Oh, I'm hungry. But I don't have to eat what's parched and dry and brown. He has a plan. He knows and he sees. Green pastures. Quiet waters. Every human being is thirsty. It's a craving. It's perhaps our most desperate sense that unless I get water, I'm going to waste away. I'm going to dehydrate. I could die. And Keller noted that sheep could have confidence in a good shepherd that water was coming. And he saw where there was snow on the mountains, and it was melting, and this fresh, clean, cold water was coming down, and the leader was taking the animals to it, and yet some of those sheep stopped along the way and dipped down into muddy potholes with bacteria where previous animals had walked by and done their thing in that stinking stuff. And over time, a sheep that drinks polluted water begins to think that's the way it is. That's what water tastes like. Brothers and sisters, in our world that needs Jesus Christ so desperately, we have pure, fresh, invigorating, cleansing water. Jesus said in John 4:13 and 14 to the woman at the well in Samaria, whom he had asked for a drink of water, if you knew who it is that asks you for the water, you would ask him, and he would give you living water. And the woman said, oh, I'd like that. I won't have to keep coming to this well with my bucket. And that's not what he was talking about. Because for her, things have become so physical, so earthly, so here and now, she couldn't quite process that. In John 7:37 and 38, the Savior said, he who believes in me, as the Scripture says, springs of water will flow from his innermost being. A reservoir. John says, by this he meant the Spirit. whom the Lord would give to those who believed in Him and followed Him. You and I must never settle for the contaminated stuff that the world offers. We must never compromise. We must never try to drink from two sources. Wait on the shepherd, and He will supply your need. Keller also saw that early in the morning, even without a lake or river nearby, the grass would often be drenched with the dew. And it would sparkle. It was gleaming. It was radiant. And the sheep would get up early, and they would go and they would take the water off of that grass. He said sheep can go a long time without water, but this little amount would sustain them, often for yet another day. But in order to make sure they got that grass dew, he himself had to rise early with the sun. It was tiring. He gave up his comfort and his sleep, and he said, the Good Shepherd, He's going to make certain that we're supplied. And then he compared that to our rising early to drink deeply from the well, the spring of the Word of God. That devotional time of quiet, reflection, study, prayer, thinking, facing the whole day before it even starts. Getting the dew off the early morning grass. There's a song we sing that says something like, drop thy still dews of quietness. That's refreshment. He restores my soul. You might think that a sheep in his flock would never need to be put back on its feet again. After all, you've got the quiet waters, you've got the green pastures. You're not in want. And yet you can look at David's life and you can see again and again and again that he got knocked down. Some of it was his own doing, and he got himself in trouble. Other times it was some outside force. David's no longer on his feet. Keller says there's something that happens to sheep so that we refer to them as cast or downcast. He said a sheep will go, especially the heavy, slow, casual, don't worry about anything. They just go and find a soft spot, a little hollow, where it's low and comfy. And they just kind of get over on their side. Feels so good. And then the center of gravity shifts. And they continue. They can't quite set themselves right. And so they end up, are you ready? This is a downcast sheep. He needs help, and he needs it fast. He's going to have trouble breathing. And his organs and his circulation and everything in the sheep's body is going to be weakened. It's going to start to shut down. And he may try moving those legs. He may try to get himself up. He can't do it no matter how much effort he expends. And so the shepherd, and this reminds you of Luke 15, you have 100 sheep. 99 are here. They're all standing upright. But there's one that strayed. And he might have fallen over. He might have been hurt. He might be cast down, unable to get up. And so the shepherd, with anxiety, can I get to him in time? It's urgent. There's not a moment to lose, but also possible joy. Oh, if I find him, I can rescue him. I can restore him, put him back on his feet. And even if it was the sheep's own fault, that shepherd takes responsibility and exercises care. You say, well, I avoid getting downcast. We all get downcast sometimes, don't we? But that sheep needs discipline, diet, exercise, and balance. What do you and I need? We need discipline, diet, exercise, and balance. Oh, the paths of righteousness. Sheep, like people, are creatures of habit, and they get to where they walk and walk and walk, and it becomes a rut, and they're stuck, and there's no grass. And they just keep digging and digging and digging, and they pull up the roots and destroy what's left there. And so the shepherd says, let's go over here. And how might he want us to stretch beyond ourselves? Think about the world. Think about the need that people have. Think about ways that we ourselves can be refreshed and strengthened. Sheep tend to overgraze, and so there's erosion and disease and destruction. And what's out there, the sheep doesn't want to try it. It's untested. It's unknown. It's risky. But if the sheep trust their guide, they follow him. And if he leads them to it, it is the right way to go. He's never led his sheep the wrong way. Only if we falter or turn back will we be lost. And we need to notice it's all because of who he is, for his name's sake. This brings us back full circle. Yahweh, the Lord. Who is he? The invincible, the unbeatable, the unstoppable. His character, his nature, his very essence is in a sense on the line. And therefore, he will not fail. He will not let us down. He cannot lie. He cannot lose. He cannot be overcome by any force. We must mention, before we close, that the shepherd became the sheep. Unlike us, innocent, without spot or blemish, and he was slaughtered. The shepherd became the sheep. Unthinkable. Unthinkable that a human being, much less God, sees what sheep are and how they act and would choose not just to tend the sheep, but to become one of them. And we're talking about God becoming man and taking on all that he did to rescue sheep that are blemished and have the stain of sin. Well, there's the Lord's invitation. Jesus said the shepherd picks that animal up, puts it around his neck. That's why we say, as one book title notes, they smell like sheep. He does whatever he can possibly do to retrieve it and reclaim it and bring it back. That's what happens when we're baptized into Christ. That's what happens when we come back to Christ. We're going to sing an invitation song and encourage you to respond. Shall we stand?